Welcome to Knife Chats. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Thank you. The Congress, a traditional pattern knife. So as I continue my series on traditional pattern knives, I thought I'd show you the Congress. This is an interesting knife with a relatively long history also. The knife actually predates the Civil War in America. It goes back into probably the 1830s, 1840s, maybe even earlier than that. And as you can tell, it's an equal end knife with a sway back frame. By sway back, we're talking about the arch down here. If you notice, there's actually an arch underneath there where the frame is not actually flat on the bottom, and that's the sway back portion. And if you notice, it's got a sheep foot blade on either end and a coping blade and a pin blade. This is the standard that you'll usually see on it. And the reason it's called a Congress has nothing to do with politics. It's because the word Congress originally meant the coming together. And it's the way the blades come together in the center of the frame. Now what this knife was originally used for has everything to do with these sheep foot blades, and that's because the knife was actually used by in the tobacco farms and on the cotton farms or cotton plantations in the South. This is where the knife was really popular in the southern states in the United States, and the blades were used to test bales of cotton and bales of tobacco, and you'd poke a hole in there and pull out a chunk of tobacco or cotton. I don't know all the details of how that was done, but it was basically a two-ended cotton sampling or knife or a tobacco sampling knife, and that's why these sheep foot blades were on there. And then other blades were added to it to turn it into a really good whittling knife. That's why you have the pin blade here, which is good for putting in holes and such, and the coping blade, which is good for scribing and such. And so the knife became very popular among people who whittle, as well as people who were using it in the trades for cotton and tobacco. And the frame remained very popular, especially in the southern states, but it also gained popularity in the northern states. And what you're looking at here is pretty much the standard, the typical Congress with the four blades and the overall length of, let's see here, probably right around 3.5, 3 3/4 inches, somewhere around there, 3.5 inches. And that's about the usual length you'll see on them. Sometimes they'll be as little as 3 inches, such as this one here. And sometimes they get as long as like 4 inches and such. But usually the typical length is right there in the middle, somewhere around 3.5, 3 5/8 inches or so. And as you notice, they sometimes have a square bolster or round bolsters like you see on here. But that's your four blade standard Congress. But even among the standard length Congresses, such as this one that's, like I said, about 3 5/8 inches, you also have skinnier ones about the same length, and sometimes you'll hear these the larger ones called a high boy, and that's referring to how proud the blades are sticking up above the heavier frame. And sometimes you'll hear these this one by Case called a slim line, and it's because it's a much slimmer Congress. If you can tell the difference between the two, this the top one's by US Classic and the bottom one is by Case, and you can tell much thicker frame on the top compared to the lower frame, the slim line. So that's something else you'll see even within the standard length Congresses. You'll see some that are called a high boy and some that are called a slim line. You'll also see Congresses that do not have all the blades in them. For instance, this little Camillus one with the abalone handle only has two blades, a sheep foot on one end and a pen blade on the other. Sometimes you'll see a sheep foot and a coping blade on these. And it's basically called a half Congress because it's only got two blades on it. It still has the sway back frame and everything, so it looks like a Congress until you start opening up the blades and you notice it only has two blades, and therefore they call it a half Congress because it doesn't have four blades. And then we have this little one by Rough Rider here that has three blades. And if you notice, not only that, it has two springs on the back, and the middle blade, if you notice there's a blade going down the middle, which is the sheep foot blade, is working off of both of these back springs, typical of a whittler. And the other blades it has are in this case, a pin blade and a coping blade. It actually had two pin blades originally. I turned the second pin blade into a coping blade. But these are called a Congress whittler because it's laid out in whittler fashion with a large blade on one end and two small blades on the other. So it's laid out like a whittler, so it's called a Congress whittler because it's still built on a Congress frame, and it has the main blade being a sheep foot blade. So let's get all those blades open again. So there we have it, the Congress whittler and a half whittler. Now the three-blade Congress, the whittler Congress, I'm not sure how long they've been around, probably good 50, 60 years or so, maybe even longer than that. I wouldn't even doubt if they go back as far as the original Congresses. And the half whittler is probably the same thing. They've probably been around about as long as a regular Congress. The idea of just putting fewer blades on the knife would not have been unusual. But this next one I'm going to show you is a relatively new idea. And this is a 5-blade Congress, which has been dubbed a Kentucky Congress. It has all the other blades that you find on a regular Congress, except in the middle between all the blades they put a large clip blade that drops right in between the other four blades. So you still have a pen blade and a sheep foot. And on the other side, I think this one actually just has two pins. So another pin and a sheep foot. And then the large clip blade that's dropping in between. Now, the Kentucky Congress has probably been around for less than 40 years. I have a feeling this was a knife that was actually created by Jim Frost and originally sold through Jim Frost on his various TV programs and stuff. So the Kentucky Congress, though built on a traditional frame, is not a typical Congress that you'll find. It's still kind of an interesting knife, and I can see how a lot of people would like to have that clip blade in the middle. So there's another one you can think of, is this 5-blade Kentucky Congress, as Jim Frost has called it. I'm not sure if it was around before Jim Frost or not, or if it was a pattern that he picked up and repopularized. But that's one you can also think about, is the 5-blade Kentucky. What I can tell you is that even before the Civil War, you'll find Congresses with more than 4 blades on them. For instance, 6-blade Congresses were somewhat common that far back, and they would still have like the sheep foot blade and a sheep foot blade, and then the other 4 blades would vary depending on the taste of the owner and where the knife was being made. Quite often these knives were being made in Sheffield, England back then. This is one by Whitetail Cutlery, which is kind of interesting. They usually don't make these. Has nice stag handles and nickel silver bolsters, and as you can tell, the 2 sheep foot blades. Up front, it's got a clip blade, and it has a coping blade, and then you have the pin blade, and finally it has a Warncliffe blade. all on nice stag handles. And if you notice, it's got 4 back springs here as opposed to the 2 you would normally have on a Congress, simply because of the additional blades. These knives, the 6-blade Congresses, are sometimes referred to as a Lincoln Congress. Now, the reason for that is because when Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, he was found to have a Congress knife in his pocket that had 6 blades. Now, the blades did not match what you see on this knife, but simply because he had a 6-blade knife and this is another Congress with 6 blades on it, they just tend to lump them all together as a Lincoln Congress. I'll insert a picture of what the actual Lincoln Congress had on it, along with the actual blades that were there. That's what a true Lincoln Congress is, but sometimes any 6-blade Congress is just referred to as a Lincoln Congress because it has 6 blades. What I'll also show you here is that not all Congress knives have 2 sheepfoot blades. For instance, this somewhat older case knife I have from the 1970s, you see here it has a sheepfoot blade, and then on the other side here it has more of a drop point or spear point blade. They almost look like this might have been changed by the owner, and that might be the case. I don't know for sure because I'm not the original owner, but the slope here is definitely more than what you see on a sheepfoot, if you can tell. Let's get that. If you see the slope here is definitely more than what you see on this sheepfoot here, and then it does come up a bit there, so it's like a drop point blade. Let me see if I can get these two closer together so you can see it. There you can see a better idea of how the blades are slightly profiled differently. It's more clearly visible on this Colt Congress, where you see a definite sheepfoot blade and a definite spear point blade. So sometimes you'll see that on the Congress knife, and that's because some people really don't need 2 sheepfoot blades, and even among whittlers, the choice of a sheepfoot and a spear point make a whole lot of sense. And these knives are very popular among people who whittle, simply because of the other blades on there, the coping and the pin blade. So you will also find Congress knives that do not have 2 sheepfoot blades, but it's still built on the Congress frame, which is this equal swayback frame. So the frame is one of the key features of it, along with a sheepfoot blade, normally 2 sheepfoot blades. So this is a slightly modified Congress knife. But if you're looking for the absolute most traditional Congress you can find, it's going to be the one with 2 sheepfoot blades, a coping blade, and a pin blade. Oops, well, there you have it. All your Congress knives coming together. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will work on another video on traditional patterns soon. As always, thanks for dropping by, and remember, you're only as sharp as your knife.